and some teaching too. So I titled the talk "Staying Sharp and How to Keep Our Brain Healthy and Active." So I wanted to kind of go through two my kind of major parts. One is just what is normal aging and what is kind of abnormal aging when it relates to the brain. And then step two, I think, which is what's on everyone's mind, is how you can stay sharp and what we know about how to maintain brain health. And there's a lot of answers, and you just try to implement as many as possible. But I want to leave some time for questions at the end too, just to kind of show that if you're worried about your memory, you're not the only one. Just to say that cognition is a common concern, and I think that this is a quote from Dr. Yaffe, who's one of the kind of Brain Health Institute people at UCSF. But I just think it illustrates a lot that people forget things, a name, where they put their keys, a phone number, and yet what is dismissed as a minor inconvenience at 25 years of age can evolve into a momentary anxiety at 35 and a major source of personal worry at age 55 or 60. So just to say that we all forget things, and there's times where these things that we forgot when we were 30 and 50 and then 60, we think that we're now senile or going somewhere that's bad. So just to say that it's a common concern, but that's not always necessarily the case, which is what I want to say. And that, when they screen people, that 80 to 90% of people mentally sharp is a big concern. So is this normal aging? So this is Superman in his later years saying, I don't know, where was I going? So we'll kind of go into that normal. So some of the facts is that, we all, as we age, the brain shrinks. And that's a common, that's normal aging. That's for all of us. So, at age 65, you start losing about a teaspoon of brain a year, and by 85, that's half a cup. So we lose parts of our brain, but that doesn't mean that we all have dementia, and that doesn't mean that we all have memory issues that are affecting our day-to-day life. So these are some of the normal changes that people can expect and have when they get older, and this is considered normal aging. And the big thing is that it's hard to recall names or words. So right away, the immediate recall takes a while, and usually people can get to it later, but it takes a while to get to certain names and words, especially the less familiar they are. So especially things like names of someone that you haven't seen for a long time, someone that you haven't seen for a long time, or a thing that you don't use very often. And that your working memory, it gets difficult to process multiple things at once. So multitasking is not something that you can do easily. So, trying to keep on one task is usually okay, but when you're balancing the grocery list and how to get your keys and how to get, remember that there's a birthday tomorrow, those things could be difficult all at once. And the executive function is slow. So that's kind of the more advanced processing. And it's just that things are slower. Things take longer to get through than they used to, which can be frustrating to a lot of people. But there are things that aren't normal. So unable to recognize familiar objects or people. So someone that you see often, maybe your kids, neighbors, not remembering their names, or familiar objects, not remembering the name of that. And the biggest thing that I want to emphasize is when we really start to worry when someone comes into my clinic and I'm worried, it's when it's affecting their day-to-day function. So it's not just something that they're noticing, but it's actually affecting something that they need to do. So, sometimes when people are working, they really notice it a lot earlier, or other people notice it, but a lot of people are retired and they're not working, and their day-to-day function might not seem like a job, but, we have a lot that we do in our everyday lives that could be affected. And that's what I want to say, that's the big thing that when we think of a red flag or something that we worry about. So what is day-to-day function to someone like me? What does that mean? And there's two kinds of things that we put categories in, and you'll hear about it sometimes, but there's activities of daily living, or ADLs, and then the instrumental activities of daily living. And the ADLs are things that people usually are able to do for a really long time until someone's memory problems are really bad. I mean, they're the basic stuff. When I say, well, getting up in the morning, what do you have to do? You have to get out of bed, you have to go to the bathroom, you have to shower, and you have to get dressed and eat breakfast. The basic things that allow us to live in the world. But the instrumental activities of daily living, this right side, is actually the part that gets affected first when people start having memory issues. And the biggest ones, there's cooking, cleaning, shopping, but those could be impaired because of a lot of physical issues, arthritis, difficulty getting out of the house. So the ones that I like to really focus on is when people start having trouble with their medications, because that's a pretty complex task that's hard to organize. So when that starts becoming a problem, that's a problem to obviously me because I'm prescribing it, but also to the person because they might be not taking it, taking too much, and then also finances. So I'm kind of one of the few doctors that ask about how people are doing with their bills, and not because I'm trying to delve into things, but because missing bills and financial problems are an early sign of memory problems. There's actually a study that showed that they looked at people who were victims of financial fraud, and that they had a higher risk of developing dementia later, 5-10 years down the road. Not that they had it initially, but that was a sign of maybe that they were developing some issues that weren't picked up on. And this was from bank data, which is interesting. It wasn't from any sort of doctor's office or anything. They just looked at banks and then they went to their health records later. So when it starts affecting your function, then we kind of get into the element of dementia. And there's this precursor to dementia called mild cognitive impairment. We call it MCI, or mild cognitive impairment. And that's when people have cognitive changes that are more than what I said that are expected for aging. So they have an abnormal cognitive test that's a little bit more, there's more of a problem than we would expect. But it's not affecting their function, their day-to-day function yet. So in these people, it's really important, and I think that this is an important diagnosis to make because it's when you can make changes. Because not everyone who has mild cognitive impairment develops dementia, but 10% per year usually do develop some form of dementia. So it's an important phase where there's some to address your reversible risk factors before it starts affecting function. And then we get to major cognitive impairment. That's the newer term for what dementia. And that's usually, something that is progressive and is a chronic problem that it starts affecting not only the instrumental activities of daily living, but really starts affecting your daily living. People think of dementia, unfortunately, they think of it mainly as a memory problem, but it starts becoming a physical problem. I'm sure everyone's hands would go up. I've seen people do this where you feel like, who has someone who's personally affected or family or knows someone who's affected with dementia, and everyone has someone in their lives, whether it's a close friend or a grandparent that before we just said they went senile, so maybe that's what you heard a long time ago with, grandparents, but, it's something that really affects almost all of us in some way or touches us in some way. So just to go quickly, different types of dementia, this is just to say that Alzheimer's dementia, there's a lot of news about it, and you might hear a lot of things about Alzheimer's and there's new drugs coming out for it, but just to say that Alzheimer's dementia disease, it's a type of dementia. So not all dementia is Alzheimer's. And now with all this stuff coming out, not all Alzheimer's is not all Alzheimer's disease is dementia. There's a lot of new therapies and things that are being tested now. Nothing's really ready for prime time, but just to say that Alzheimer's is not necessarily all dementia. And there's other types of dementia. One is vascular dementia, where people have had strokes or have small areas where the blood flow isn't great to the brain, and that causes dementia. And then there's two other ones that you could hear about sometimes on the news: dementia with Lewy body, which is kind of on the Parkinson spectrum. I think they think Robin Williams might have had that, early on. And then frontotemporal dementia, when people are a lot younger and they have a lot of personality changes. And those are a lot less common. So most people have Alzheimer's, vascular, or some sort of mix of both of them. And the diagnosis is less. It's probably be more important as time goes on. But right now, it's we do a lot of the similar things. All the things that I'm talking about are to prevent both these types. So just to kind of go over how we test for this in clinic. So one thing is that we ask people to draw a clock. So I don't know if anyone's gone to the doctor's visit and they ask them to draw a clock, but it might seem a little strange. And actually there's some talk about, well, with the newer generations, they even know how to read a clock or draw a clock. Will this still be valid? But right now it still is. And just to say that, that there's a lot that goes into drawing a clock, that you need to know how to make a shape. You need to know how to put things in place. You need to remember, that these numbers represent minutes. There's a lot that goes into it. So it's kind of just like a one snapshot, easy thing that kind of provides a lot of insight. And you can see that people who have, normal, that's, what is that, 230, right? But then there's people, in MCI or early Alzheimer's, you can see that the clock, it looks okay, but it starts kind of sagging. There's parts where, they're not in the right positions. Numbers are in the not right positions. They might get mixed up with the hands. And then, obviously in late Alzheimer's disease, people are having trouble even just representing, you can't even tell it's a clock, really. So one of the tests is called the mini-cog. So this is when they ask you to draw a clock and they ask you to remember 3 words. And this is a screener test. So if you ever get this done and you get it wrong, it does not mean you have dementia. It just means that they should do more testing. So when people have, aren't able to recall any of the 3 words on the left side, it's a sign that they need more testing. Or if someone is only able to recall 1 or 2 words and they can't draw the clock well, then they should get more testing. So that's what the mini-cog is. And there's also something called the MOCA, which is not the drink, but it's a cognitive test, Montreal cognitive assessment. And it's a more detailed test. It includes a clock drawing test and 5-word recall. And this is kind of one of the standardized tests that a doctor might do. This is the one that Trump said that he passed with flying colors. If you remember that that debacle. But so that means that he doesn't have dementia, but it doesn't mean a lot much else than that. So now, how to maintain brain health. So this is the kind of moving to the second part of the talk, which is kind of what we know about helping keep cognition. And this is just a reminder that sometimes reminders do help us stay independent. So a lot of us while we get the small memory issues, reminders help all of us. So I thought this was a good reminder for that. So when you look up what's going to help me with my brain health, and if you Google, this was 5 years ago when I initially did this talk, so it's that, but you'll come up with all these pills, right, that you can take. Prevagen is the one that I hear the most in clinic, but there's a lot of other ones, Omega XL, all these different things. I'm not sponsored by any of these people, and in fact, they shouldn't sponsor me because I'm going to say that none of this stuff really is shown to prove anything. I mean, the thing is that when you see more pills for something, it's just a common concern because there's money in it. So it means it's a really tough problem that people care about, but it doesn't say that the pills are going to work. And all these things have the warning. This is from the Prevagen, is that these statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. The product is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure, or prevent any disease. So they're saying right there, the thing that they're saying that they're doing, they can't do. It's not shown to prevent any disease. So a lot of these things, unfortunately, it's not so easy as take 2 and call me in the morning disease, okay? So these are kind of, I had 4 steps before, and now there's 6 steps that I came up with based off of kind of just my reading of the literature and dementia prevention, but kind of just to break it down into 6 steps to organize the talk. It's, avoiding certain medications, sleeping well, addressing your health risk factors, which is the biggest one. That's and then maintaining physical activity, staying socially and intellectually engaged, and helping with your hearing, which is a new one that I think that is important to talk about. So one is avoiding certain medications. So there's actually certain, we look at, there's a list called the Beers list, which is Dr. Beers, not the drink, that, of medications to avoid in older adults. And one of them is all these that can affect memory. And the biggest one that I see, that most of them are prescription medications, so you're not really under control of them. It's good to know, so you can talk to your doctor if you're on one of these. You can talk, is this the right thing for me? If there's some risk, there's some benefit. But the one that everyone could get over the counter is Benadryl. And Benadryl is actually the most common over-the-counter sleep aid. All the things that say Advil PM, you can see here there's ibuprofen and diphenhydramine. That's the generic form for Benadryl. So most of these things are just Benadryl. So yeah, it'll knock you out, but it doesn't help provide sustained sleep, and regular use of this is associated with developing dementia and cognitive issues. And if someone has dementia, it can make them seem a lot worse. So I've seen people who seem a lot worse off than they probably are just because they're on this medication. So something that you could think about. So most PM medications have this. I mean, you could look specifically and see. And then Benadryl itself obviously has it. There's some vertigo medications that could have some of this property. And then some overactive bladder medications can have this. So there's new overactive bladder medications that don't. And then things that are sleep aids like Ambien, anxiety medications like Ativan. It's a class of anxiety medications that can contribute to memory issues. So, and it's hard because a lot of people, some of you might be on it, and I have a lot of patients that are on it, and it helps them so much, but it's always a discussion. I'm just like, well, but in the long run, it's going to hurt. So we have to just talk about how can we help with your symptoms without this medication sometimes, because it's really something that people feel like helps a lot, obviously, but it's important to know that there's some risk to them. So sleeping well. So obviously not without Benadryl would be good, but sleeping well is very important, and I think that we're only learning more and more about how important sleep is for maintaining cognitive health. And I think the big thing is maintaining sleep hygiene. When you talk about sleep hygiene, and this is what most doctors are going to go over the first thing you say you have sleeping problems, I hope, is kind of how to maintain that. And the one is that your bed is only for sleep and sex. That's the biggest thing. That you don't do anything else there. You're not watching TV. You're not reading the paper to wind down. You're not looking at your phone. You're not there just because there's not another chair in your apartment and you just don't like them that much. You really having that physical feeling of like, I sleep in this bed and nothing else. It does set your brain up for falling asleep easier and sleeping more restfully. Obviously things like, avoiding lights and, the basic stuff, but I'm just going to talk about the ones that are a little bit less, known. So, delaying bedtime until you're sleepy. So I tell people, there's a lot of people that go to bed because they're bored. I have that a lot. They're just like, there's nothing else to do. I go to bed at 8 and I can't fall asleep. Well, you should probably set your bedtime later. The more time that you stay in your bed awake is worse for your sleep hygiene. So, I tell people like, well, what do you do to go to sleep? Well, I watch TV, I read a book. Okay, do that somewhere else, and then go to bed when you're very tired. And he was like, well, doc, I can't go to bed then. It's 10. I still can't go to sleep. What about midnight? I don't know. It's a little late, but I don't think I could still go to sleep then. Well, what about 2? There's going to be a time where you're going to be sleepy. There's I haven't met someone who couldn't sleep. They can't. It's hard to sleep, but they sleep. And it's important to kind of delay your bedtime until you're actually tired, and then start moving it up as your body kind of acclimates to the fact that, hey, when I go to bed, I go to sleep. Like, it's a very important connection to start making. Avoiding caffeine is a big one. That's hard for me, but and then avoiding too much fluids before bed. So nighttime urination is a big problem as people get older, and it could be a reason for disrupted sleep. And talking to your doctor if you feel like that's an issue. There's a whole thing called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and this thing is from the VA, but it's just an app that goes through kind of some help. Because cognitive behavioral therapy is usually done by a therapist, and those are pretty hard to come by and actually expensive. So, if your insurance covers it, that would be great, but there are some free things to do. And if you need medication, avoiding things that are these PM medications that have the Benadryl, but things that have known to be a little bit safer profiles are things like magnesium. They talk about MadCalm, or something like melatonin, are over-the-counter things that are alternatives that are better than those ones that I showed you before. And then treating sleep apnea. So, people who have sleep apnea have there's some signs that maybe they have some more cognitive issues during the day. So everyone's saying that, oh, my partner snores all the time, but it's more than just snoring. It's actually having episodes where you stop breathing. You're having a lot of daytime fatigue, overweight, high blood pressure, all risk factors for that. So talk to your doctor about that if you think that that's a concern. And then addressing your health risk factors. So this is just to show that there's a lot of different things that kind of come together, and there's a lot of different ways they're linked to dementia. So things like diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, high cholesterol, and obesity, being overweight. It creates this kind of system where your body's kind of stressed, is what is thought, and that could provide. And when things are inflammatory and stressed, it could also lead to the same changes in the brain. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those things that going through the 4 that I think are important. Is that high blood pressure is probably more important than we thought. Before we thought someone is older, it's normal for their blood pressure to go up. The vessels get stiffer, and controlling it is not that helpful to them. And I think that we're finding more and more that lowering the blood pressure and being, I wouldn't say aggressive, but being very diligent with the blood pressure actually helps prevent cognitive issues and dementia. So before we said below 150, everyone needs to be below 150, but if it's higher than that, don't worry. But now I think that the goal, most people, if you don't have a lot of other problems going on, less than 130 is probably the goal. For people with blood pressure issues. And a lot of people out there might feel that that's a little too low. And it depends on what you're on, but I think that a lot of my patients who don't have anything else going on, they just have blood pressure issues, they're in their 90s, they don't have been on any medications and their blood pressure is high, I really say like that's the one thing that I think might actually help you in the long run if you're wanting to address something. And I don't just whatever the number is doesn't matter. It's just what else is going on. If they have 10 other medications and they're seeing 5 doctors, maybe I won't care so much about that number, but that number is really important. So I think more and more is coming out about this, but I think that blood pressure is really important. Less than 130 is usually more the goal than just letting people ride up because they're older. But it's important to also know that people also have blood pressure drops when they stand up when they get older. So it's important to not overtreat the blood pressure so that they're feeling dizzy or putting at risk for falls. So that's a big thing. And we'll talk more about the DASH diet, but that's a diet to reduce hypertension. And it's probably the most beneficial thing for at least diet-wise. So cholesterol, well, should I be taking all these meds? These stat Lipitor is the most common one, but there's a whole class of medications called statins that help lower cholesterol. And there's nothing that shows that lowering cholesterol prevents diabetes. Prevents dementia at all. So really, it's something where you want to just do everything that's lifestyle-wise to help lower your cholesterol. And if your doctor recommends a cholesterol medication, it's usually because either they're trying to prevent heart attack or stroke, which should prevent dementia because strokes lead to dementia, but we just haven't seen that yet. So it's important just to do diet, but not necessarily be on a medication just because of this dementia concern. But if people have had diabetes or they have that heart attack or stroke, there's other reasons to be on cholesterol medication. But what I would say is diet and exercise are probably the most important in this situation. And then what about diet? So this is the hardest part. Everyone cares the most about diet, I think. And it's hard to give. I'm sure there's doctors that are very prescriptive with diet, and I'm not. I'm kind of trying to figure out what's sustainable for people. This is just the Michael Pollan quote that I think kind of serves for all of it is that eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. So that's pretty much, if you're going to take something away, that's probably it. But there are 2 diets that have been shown to at least benefit overall health and maybe help with memory just because of the effects on blood pressure. And that's the DASH and Mediterranean diet. And the DASH diet is pretty much what I said. It's pretty much eating more whole grains, low salt. The things on the right are more of the issues that you want to see is that, processed foods, canned foods, just because of how much salt are in them. Frozen foods too have a lot of hidden salt. Bread has a lot of hidden salt, certain bread. So, and then avoiding red meats, trying to keep water and not fruit juice or sodas, and avoiding saturated fats and butter. But kind of keeping your plate looking like this is a good way to follow that. So it's a lot more. I think you're used to the American plate is usually the top is the rice or the pasta or the grains, but it should be more the vegetables and the fruit that are the top. Mediterranean diet, it's kind of very similar, but it's a lot of I don't even need to go into it, but it's a lot of the similar stuff. What I say is that this is kind of how DASH and Mediterranean, and they're very, very similar to each other. But I would just say the best diet is the one that you can stick to. So small changes are huge. I think that if someone just said like, hey, I'm eating a lot of canned soups, and I stopped doing that, I'm able to substitute that for maybe a soup that I made or another low sodium soup. Like that's a huge change. So I think that rather than being prescriptive about diets, looking at these principles and saying what in my life is the thing that I'm doing the most of, right? If I'm eating a slice of chocolate cake once a month and I cut that out, I don't think you're going to do much to your health. You should enjoy that. But if you're someone who's eating it, a lot, half a cake every night, maybe that's that's somewhere where you could make some difference, And then lifestyle changes. So this was before the Oscars, so Will Smith wasn't as big of a controversial figure, but just saying that there's things that we can do for our lifestyle that help with our health. The biggest thing is that, cutting down smoking, even though there's no signs that smoking leads to dementia, there's a stroke risk with smoking. And I always talk about smoking with my patients, and if you're smoking, cutting down, it's never too late to quit. People say, hey, whatever, I'm 80 and just leave me alone. But, anytime you quit, within a couple of years, you're kind of back to the risk as if you never smoked, which is interesting. So it's really important it's not too late. I'm like, and then I tell people, like, well, you think you're going to live more than 2 years? And they're like, oh, yeah. Okay, well then it's not too late. And then also just watch, head trauma. This is the reason why I put this movie up, is because it was the football players and the chronic traumatic encephalopathy. But it's important to protect your own heads. If you guys are biking around, wearing a helmet, trying to avoid falls, wearing seatbelts, those are important still. And then so the number 4 is kind of keeping active. And a lot of people ask me what specifically that is, and that's hard too. But what we think is important is trying to keep being prescriptive and doing at least 150 minutes a week, and for at least 3 days per week. So just whatever that breaks down to, that's about 20 minutes every day, maybe a little bit longer. And it doesn't have to be something like people think that exercising is like when they were younger. Like, oh, I need to go run, or I need to go play soccer, something. But that's not the exercise that I'm talking about. It's just walking a little more briskly, going for a longer walk. These things are the things that really help. Vigorous exercise, actually, heavy cleaning is on this list. That heavy, cleaning your house could be enough. I'm sure some of you may know around spring, but it's really finding something that works for you, that's regular and prescriptive, and just looking at things that you're doing already. Maybe you walk to the store. Maybe you could do that more often. That's enough to increase your exercise. Things that you're already doing in life, and increasing those things, and the things that you enjoy doing that don't seem like they're annoying to do. Those work. And it's really probably the most important thing. Of all those things on the list, that the exercise is the one thing that's been shown that people who get over the 150 minutes, per week, are less likely to develop dementia. So exercise is still the most important thing for everything. I don't know anything that is hurt by it. Arthritis is hard, but that's another stuff. So one thing is that when I say number 5 is staying socially and intellectually engaged, and what I mean by socially engaged is just everyone who's here, I would say, is a way of being socially engaged. I think the problem is that there's more and more about how loneliness is a big problem in our society as people kind of become more isolated, less community. People are not in intergenerational households in the U.S. But it just becomes more of a problem that we know that there's actually health outcomes that happen with loneliness. So people are more likely to develop dementia if they self-identify as being lonely. Now, we can't say for sure that not being lonely prevents dementia, but this is correlative that, we don't know if people are isolated because they're having memory problems, and that's why it seems like people who are lonely are more likely, or what the causation is, but it's definitely seen. And it's different than being isolated. Some people like being isolated, okay? Because you like being home alone and reading a book doesn't mean that it's a problem. Loneliness is really a self-identified feeling, and some questions that are screeners is the feeling that you lack companionship, feeling left out, feeling isolated. So people could be quite content being isolated, but if you're feeling like that, you feel, those thoughts and that feeling is really important for what loneliness is. And potential solutions that I just thought about is like, I think transportation is a big issue for a lot of people. I think that easier access, finding ways of getting, what's on your bus routes, what's near you that you can get to be more engaged is helpful. Joining organizations like this, or even volunteering, something that you enjoy doing, is a great way to be social without really making it like I'm going out to be social. Really, you're just volunteering, and being social is just a secondary part of it. And then reaching out to people regularly. So, sometimes it's hard for us to feel like when we reach out, we feel like we're being needy or we're needing something from someone. But, just scheduling check-ins with someone, just saying that, it'd be nice to talk every now and then, or once a month or something. And those things really do help. And it's for, just say the doctor told you to do it. And then cognitive training. So a lot of people have all these brain apps on their phone, and this, Sudoku and the crosswords and all that stuff, and there's nothing that's been shown to prevent dementia in these situations. So what I would say is that if you enjoy doing it, keep doing it. But if you don't need to start. There's other ways to be, like I'm saying, cognitively and socially engaged that aren't those specific tasks. So find something that keeps you engaged, but it doesn't have to be anything specific or prescriptive. And I would say that Depression's a big part of it. So things that, just being, I think avoiding being bored is what I say is the most important thing, because that means that you're being stimulated physically, mentally, and if you are bored, trying to figure out how I can solve that, I think is really a big help for people. And helping your hearing. So this is a new one that I think is really important, because there's more and more that's about how hearing loss is actually a reversible risk factor for developing dementia. And it's really interesting that there's actually people that, it's so reversible that I see people who I talk with in clinic, they seem like they don't know what's going on. And I'm worried that they have dementia, right? But you can tell that maybe they're just not, it just seems a little different than what I'm used to, Maybe it's not that they're forgetting people's names or forgetting their appointments, but when I talk to them, it just seems like they're not getting what I'm saying. And then I use one of these, the thing on the left is a pocket talker. That's the brand of it, but there's a whole bunch of these kind of things that are this is just easy to have in clinic, right? It doesn't require a prescription. We just have them around. You just put headphones on, and it amplifies the sound, and then they're like completely normal. So people cover up for hearing loss. People don't just say, "I can't hear, can you repeat yourself?" They usually try to answer the question to whatever they heard, right? Or they just give some non-response of like, "Oh yeah," even though they didn't hear what was going on. People don't like just asking people to repeat themselves, or they're sick of it. They kind of just let it go. But what I tell people is that, doing this is helpful to prevent dementia, but also will make you look better. It'll make you look younger. People are always worried about having, hearing aids. People are very resistant to it. Well, one thing is that everyone has something in their ears nowadays. Okay, 20-year-olds have the AirPods. Everyone has a Bluetooth headset. It's not weird to walk around with something in your ears, first of all. And then second of all, I think you look older if you don't hear. I think the people that I see that look old are the people that are like, huh, you know what? That makes you look older than if you wore something in your ears, to me. Now, you can make your own opinion about that, but that's how I encourage people that, people are worried about looking older, they wear the hearing aids, all this stuff. Now, cost is a big problem. Now, that I can't say is not a barrier to care. But the thing is that, the audiologist, going to audiologists, they fit you. The point is that it's kind of a concierge kind of service, right? They fit you, they readjust. There's usually a warranty. It's very nice, but it could be somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 for a pair of hearing aids, because they package it, right? It's not just the actual cost of the hearing aids. But now there's so many over-the-counter options, actually. The only problem with a lot of the over-the-counter things is that they need to be tuned with a smartphone. So someone either needs to know how to work a smartphone pretty well, or have someone in their family that can set it up for them. But the over-the-counter ones, they're all coming out now. They're ranging between 1,000, 800 to 1,500 for a really good set. So it's cheaper, but you're not having someone troubleshoot it. But for a lot of people, it can really get you by. Costco is another one that people go to, which is an audiologist that's a little bit cheaper as well. So just some options that I've heard from patients. And if you do have Medi-Cal, so that's like, the safety net insurance for low income, that does cover hearing aids if the hearing loss is significant enough. So just so you know, if you do have Medi-Cal, that you might be eligible for getting hearing aids covered. But unfortunately, Medicare doesn't. And I think it's wrong that they don't. But it's because it's like I'm just saying, it's affecting your health, right? So, but right now it's not covered. I think there's more down the road. And then, so this is kind of just what your doctor can do if you complain of memory issues. So one is administering the standardized cognitive test like the MOCA. So something you could expect if you go into a visit, maybe just some things that they might do. Asking how it's affecting your life. I hope they ask about finances and medications. They don't always, but I think that's really important. Ordering blood work. So usually, they just do the regular blood count, kidney function, liver function, make sure that there's not something that's a medical issue causing you to have memory problems, right? Checking maybe your thyroid, maybe cholesterol. But then if they're concerned for actual memory issues or dementia, then they might order a CAT scan or MRI of the brain to look for any signs of old strokes. B12. Sometimes they do HIV and syphilis testing just so you're not like throwing why are they doing that. It's just part of the panel for reversible causes of dementia. So they're not making a comment about your lifestyle, just part of the deal. And then asking for a support person to have on file. So I always say this is important, is that it's just not that you're not, and a lot of people think that I'm taking away any sort of independence or decision making. That's not it. It's having just someone as an emergency contact initially. But if someone starts having memory issues, it's really important to have someone as an advocate to help. And someone who's good is someone who lets you do all your decisions, but sometimes there needs to be a little extra help. Maybe it's another set of ears, maybe it's just support for certain activities. But what I say is that for people to be independent, if they start having memory problems, it's accepting some level of help. Declining all help actually makes you less independent. It's more risk for you to go into the hospital, more risk for you to need to be in a nursing home. So I'd say that, it's a balance. I don't want people to be dependent on other people, but also when you start having problems, the people that I see that have the most problems are people that don't accept any help, more so than just a little bit. Maybe they just need help organizing their pill set once a week, and that's enough to get them okay. So I'm just throwing that out there because I know that I would be the same way. Trust me, I would be very resistant, but it is important. And then encouraging everyone. So I didn't talk. I'm just going to give a shout out to this just because it's important. Is that everyone should have an advanced directive or living will. And I'll show a site just really quick about what to have in that. But that's designating a power of attorney that doesn't really take into place until you're not able to make your own decisions. So you're not giving anything up. And then also just preferences for your health. And if there's concern for dementia, you can get referred to a lot of different places. There's neuropsychologists that can do more testing, a geriatrician like myself, a neurologist, and there's also a lot of memory centers. So UCSF, Sutter in San Francisco, and UC Davis are the main ones here. And they're the ones that kind of more if you're interested in more either being clinical trial or you're interested in like newer medications to help with dementia and see if you're a candidate. I don't know if you've heard about some of these newer infusions and things like that. There's not a lot of people that it works for. But if you're thinking like, hey, I really want to get on top of this and get the best possible care, then usually these memory centers can at least guide you in the right direction. And this is just the website for advanced directives. Prepare for your care is just one of them. It has an easy to read healthcare directive. It really is easy. It's pretty self-explanatory if you go through it. I'm sure people here could have it. I'm sure everyone. Normal aging includes a change in brain function. So we're not going to be the same as we were earlier, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't worry about it and bring up concerns. But a change in day-to-day function is not normal aging. So if it's affecting your day-to-day work, that's not normal aging. Controlling chronic health problems can help maintain your cognitive health. Being physically active and mentally active are the most important things. And then staying socially engaged and avoid feeling lonely. Getting a hearing test. And unfortunately, there's no magic pill to prevent dementia, but there are lots of pills that can make it worse. And then completing advanced directive is important for anyone. So these are just some of the references. The right is just a podcast if everyone's interested by a geriatrician. That kind of has they're very long, but they're very practical.